I think it's a mistake. And looking back in history, unless this is very different, unless the parallels to this and that smarter, Ken Rogoff and others have written about, unless this is different, and unless Bernanke and company are truly geniuses, I don't think we're out of the woods. I think we're just in the beginnings of this longer resetting period. And it may look up one day, it may look down one day. Up one day, it may look down the next day. But until we figure out a new way to build a new kind of way of life and way of working, which creates the demand for new industries, doesn't try to stoke the fire back under the old housing. I mean, this is what I say is the huge mistake. Bail out the housing market, bail out the banks, bail out the auto companies, try to bring back, because we don't want to feel the pain, try to bring back the economy of the past. It simply can't work. What we need to do is create a new way of living and working that can actually generate demand and cause the growth of new industries. And I do think that's a much longer-term process.
But it wasn't an industrial crisis, was it, Rich? It was a financial crisis, and the root of it was basically too much debt, which was far too cheap, and and you had huge amounts of liquidity coming in from China. We know this story pretty well at this point. So the question is, I mean, you were saying that there were various areas of the United States which have been completely devastated by the crisis, and I was thinking to myself, well, what are they? I mean, the Rust Belt was pretty devastated even before the crisis, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Sun Belt. And the Sun Belt cities of sand built on just real estate. They're the places that have been devastated, and they were heading towards devastation. So it really means one has to rethink the way you want to grow.
Well, and now that everyone is concentrating on our beloved pigs, people are spending a lot more time. We've dealt with the enormous amounts of debt in the world of mortgages, which has proved to be particularly devastating, especially in the Sun Belt, but across the world, really. And now people are looking to sovereign debt as well, and municipal debt. That's the next sort of obvious shoe to drop, and my good friend Nouriel Roubini will talk at great length about that. But again, I'm looking at these big financial issues, and what I'm having difficulty doing is trying to take big financial issues about, what are we going to do with these trillions of dollars of Italian and Spanish and Irish and UK and even US debt, which cause a lot of trouble to people with money because it's all ultimately invested in this stuff at some point. And I'm trying to see the connection between that and we have to build high-speed railways and move back to the cities.
So the crisis of leverage was a crisis of an economy that couldn't grow, that had lost its ability to create demand for new industries, that had lost its ability to develop consumption that would stimulate the demand for new goods and services. It was an economy that was broken. And the way we tried to fix it or paper it over was by injecting huge amounts of debt and leverage into the system. That's about as much as I know. I'm not a financial economist.
So basically what happens is you were saying that you get lots of innovation in the 19th century, in the 1930s, and with that innovation comes lots of natural growth. When you have lots of natural growth, you don't need leverage in order to get nice returns. When growth rates fall and things become, and economies mature, then the only way that the people can continue to see their assets grow is by levering them up, and then the more leverage you have, the more of a problem you have. And so it seems to me that your prescription is, well, hey, what we should do is de-lever and go back to being really innovative and have lots of natural growth again, which is great in theory, but has it ever actually happened? Have we ever had a sort of mature economy suddenly have lots of incredibly sort of growth-creating innovation?
Sure. The United States and North America after the 1930s. If we can't do that, we stay in. I mean, the other alternative explanation for crisis, which this is so funny to talk about history, was the explanation that Alvin Hansen gave in the Great Depression. Alvin Hansen was called the American Keynes. He was President Roosevelt's advisor. And he said that advanced economies had exhausted their factors of production. That finance was the thing that was moving capital around and increasing the growth of the economy fictitiously, and now government had to play that role. If not, you would have secular stagnation. The U.S. economy and the world economy would stagnate forever. That was until we got this new wave of innovation, Schumpeterian innovation, and we built collectively a new way of organizing our society. What did we have to do to make that happen? We had to make banks relatively, and Tom Philippon and others have written much, we had to make banks relatively less important. We had to create a new system of financial regulation, a new system of housing finance, which made mortgages both affordable and regulated them before they got back out of hand as all of that stuff came tumbling down. And we had to build a real economy and a real geography that stimulated the growth of those industries. So we built highways and infrastructure, and we subsidized some of that, creating the post-war boom. So it was very much constructed. And what the book is arguing for, empathetically and sympathetically, is we have to put our eyes back on the real economy, not in an abstract way. And you can see how important this is, because this is where at least part of the conversation has to head. Not in an abstract way about stimulating the biotech industry or putting more money in the software industry. We have to build a real geography, a real physical way of living that can speed up the growth of those industries. And here's what the book says. It quotes this ridiculous quote that Herbert Hoover never said, right? But a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. And that quote becomes emblematic of the fact that in order to grow an industrial economy, we had to massively revolutionize agriculture. We had to make food cheap. We had to get people off the farms. We had to increase the efficiency of agriculture. And it went from about 50% of all Americans and Canadians, or even more, working in agriculture, down to about 5%, and now it's down to less than 1%. And agriculture as a percent of household budget shrank, food and clothing shrank from about 50% down to 10, 15%, more or less. The figures are in the book. Housing, energy, and transport, our homes, our cars, and gasoline now consume on average more than half of household expenditures in the U.S. and Canada, and for many people 75% or more. In order to reset the economy, what the book is saying, we have to also not only create new industries, we have to rapidly increase efficiency and reduce the cost of housing, energy, and cars, housing, energy, and transport. And that will be key to resetting our economy.
So we need like a Norman Borlaug for houses. We need someone who can work out how to make our houses cost much less than they ever used to.
Absolutely. And one of the things the book, and you and I have talked a lot about, that one of the things that's going to come back on the table, that in fact is coming back on the table in the United States, that's been less coming back on the table here, every great reset has been associated with the rise of a new way of housing people. A whole new, what you call in urban affairs, housing tenure system. The creation of mass owner-occupied single-family homes after the Great Depression and World War II. We have to put that back on the table. And one of the things that you know, because your guys helped win a free book over at your website, one of the things that we're going to have to think long and hard about is moving, to some degree, backing off home ownership and moving more towards rental. Rental creates much more affordability. And actually, in the analysis we've done subsequent to publishing the book, we find that metropolitan areas and cities, Canada has about 70% owner occupancy. The U.S. is declining. It's now about 67% single-family home ownership. The metropolitan areas and cities, which are about 50 to 55% owners, 50 to 45% renters, have more robust economies, higher rates of innovation, higher rates of skill, higher rates of growth, higher incomes and wages, and are more flexible in responding to economic shifts. So one way to do that, we talk to people every day who not only tell us, I got rid of my giant house, and oh my God, my life's better, and I walk around, and I see my neighbors. Yeah, they tell us that. But the other thing they tell us is they have a lot more disposable income to spend on other stuff that they were dying to do.
Okay, but I mean, we're living, without getting too cliched about it, in a pretty global economy right now. And I was just in Phoenix last month, actually, and I was downtown on these huge blocks with these enormous streets and not a soul to be seen, and it was absolutely soul-destroying. And apparently, I'm told it's the 5th largest city in America right now. I have no idea where all of these people are, but they're not visible. And they, and so the question is, is there any conceivable way that Phoenix is ever going to be able to compete with Paris?
No. But Phoenix can be a lot better than it is. But Phoenix can rebuild itself if it gets over its addiction to growth for growth's sake. The illusion that real estate development create wealth. The illusion that mortgage finance creates wealth. That was Phoenix's problem. It thought it could build an economy around these illusory things. No, but Phoenix can build a real economy. It can reset itself and build a real economy. And that's what cities, that if they don't do that, they become ghost towns. Slowly but surely, they become ghost towns, or perhaps more accurately, people who have means and ability leave. And the people who are left behind are the people who can't move.
I know that, it's always great to traffic in that kind of optimism, but really, I mean, what's the probability that Phoenix is going to reinvent itself and manage to become a vibrant and dense work-live community?
Well, see, Felix, you're more of an economic fatalist than I am. And I'm the one who's been accused of being an economic fatalist. I'm not at all. I think that every city and every community has the opportunity to rebuild itself and focus on its real economy. But if it doesn't, it declines. Slowly but surely, it declines. I'm unwilling at this point to write off either Phoenix or Detroit. I'm willing to let them have a go at remaking themselves. Are there strong forces that are acting against them? Of course. Are there very strong global forces that we have to be aware of that are reshaping the world economy, that are concentrating people in more vibrant, more exciting places? Sure. But that doesn't mean that these places have to be written into the dustbin of history. They have the capacity, and they have a lot of people. They have the size and the scale that they can remake themselves. Whether they have the will is not something I can supply or suggest, but I'm willing to give them a shot if they want to undertake it.
It seems to me that the greatest, fastest, most vibrant, and most exciting pace of urban creation that the world has ever seen is going on every day right now in China.
Absolutely.
And we have these huge cities appearing out of nowhere, and they're incredibly inventive, and they're producing an unbelievable amount of ideas and materials, and they have, cheap energy, and they have cheap labor, and they have high-speed rail, and they have everything, again, which you've been prescribing. So, if it's, what between Europe already being there to a large degree, especially in the north, and China creating all of these cities more or less overnight, again, I ask, what's the comparative advantage of most of the US here? Or even non-Toronto Canada, for that matter?
Well, but Felix is saying something very bluntly and baldly that people get very nervous when they hear it. And if an urbanist even suggests it, they might not like it. That is, the forces acting on the world are concentrating population and assets. That is a given. That is a no-brainer. Just as globalization reshaped industries and wiped out whole national industries and gave us global industries, the same exact thing. The world is not flat. The world is incredibly uneven. And Felix is and the forces of concentration that most of us don't pay attention to. We pay attention to forces of dispersal. Things are moving offshore. There's outsourcing. The forces of concentration in this global world to get density and speed and scale are so great that it challenges. Jane Jacobs, when I met with her, said, one thing the U.S. has a lot of second and third tier cities. It's great, but how do they survive? And I think, Felix, to be really candid, all cards on the table, I think that is a legacy of U.S. economic and financial hegemony. That's where that comes from. An extremely rich country that could afford a pattern of development that was far more decentralized than the physical concentration of economic assets would allow. So now, yes, the U.S. is going to become much more concentrated and much more spatially unequal. But my God, we have to do something or attempt to do something to rebuild some of those cities or to give them potentially, if they want, not federal bailouts, a new lease on life. So that's absolutely the case. With regard to China, I've thought about this long and hard. I have a whole section on the rise of new competitors in the book. And I've really tried to parse through the rise of Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo, Seoul. I was just in Seoul. And I'll tell you, what you see as a problem in Phoenix, you see just the opposite in Seoul. You see a dark gray city coming to life. I mean, it's the most amazing thing I have ever seen as you watch a Phoenix decline or a Detroit decay, to watch Seoul rise and the plans for the future, which are just mind-bending. What the book says is I think we're still a generation, perhaps 2 generations, away from the supplanting of the great North American and European financial and economic centers. And there's a long section in the book talking about the rise of economic and financial centers on a world scale, the rise of London, the rise of New York. There's a great book by Youssef Cassis that details that. And what that book says, and what I was able to try to ascertain, is that the rise of great financial centers trails the rise of a nation as an economic center by at least a generation. So I think they rise. I think they become more important. But we're at least a generation away from Shanghai, if you will, displacing New York and London. That said, economic activity in the United States and in Europe will become more, and Canada, will become more concentrated if we don't, and we need to be aware of that and take steps to try to handle it better.